The dusty streets of Redemption Gulch lay empty under the scorching afternoon sun. Marshal Jake Clayton stood at the window of his office, watching tumbleweeds roll past the weathered buildings. Behind him, locked in the town's only jail cell, sat Anna Whitfield. She wasn't a criminal, she hadn't stolen anything or hurt anybody, but Clayton had locked her up anyway, and he had good reason. The marshal turned to look at the young woman. Her green eyes showed fear, but also a fierce determination that reminded him why he'd made this choice. She was safer behind those iron bars than anywhere else in town. Word had spread like wildfire through the territory that Anna held a secret worth killing for, and the men coming for it would stop at nothing to get it. Clayton had been Marshal of Redemption Gulch for 5 years. He'd seen his share of trouble, from cattle rustlers to claim jumpers, but this was different. The danger heading their way wasn't just another gang of outlaws. These men were organized, ruthless, and led by someone who knew exactly what Anna possessed. The townspeople didn't understand why Clayton was keeping an innocent woman locked up. They whispered in the general store and the saloon, calling him foolish or worse. Some thought Anna herself was the problem, that she'd brought trouble to their quiet town. They wanted her gone before the storm arrived. Anna sat on the narrow cot in her cell, her hands folded in her lap. She wore a simple brown dress, travel-worn and dusty from her journey to Redemption Gulch. She'd arrived 3 days ago on the back of a freight wagon, having paid the driver her last coins to bring her here. She'd heard Marshal Clayton was an honest man who couldn't be bought. That reputation was the only thing standing between her and death. The secret she carried wasn't written in any book or hidden in any strongbox. It was etched into a piece of leather she kept sewn into the lining of her dress, but the markings meant nothing without her knowledge. Her father had made sure of that before he died. Thomas Whitfield had been a surveyor, one of the best in the territory. Mining companies hired him to map their claims and search for new veins of ore. 6 months ago, while working alone in the mountains north of Redemption Gulch, he'd discovered something extraordinary. It wasn't just another silver deposit or copper seam. It was gold, pure and plentiful, hidden in a canyon that maps didn't show. Thomas knew what such a discovery meant. Men would kill for that kind of wealth, so he kept it secret, planning to file the claim quietly and secure it properly. But his partner, a man named Bartholomew Thorne, had other ideas. Thorne had seemed trustworthy at first. He'd funded Thomas's expeditions and waited patiently for results. But greed changes people, and when Thomas finally trusted him with news of the gold, everything went wrong. Instead of celebrating their fortune, Thorne demanded the location immediately. When Thomas refused, wanting to do things legally, Thorne showed his true nature. Anna's father died that night, shot in the back while trying to escape Thorne's camp. But before leaving on that final expedition, Thomas had taken precautions. He'd drawn a map of the gold's location, but not in any ordinary way. The map was encoded using a system only he and Anna understood, based on stories he'd told her as a child and places they'd traveled together. Then he'd burned the markings into leather and sent it to Anna with a letter explaining everything. Now Thorne was coming for her. He'd tracked her across 3 territories, always a step behind as she fled from town to town. His gang had grown larger and meaner with each passing week. They left destruction in their wake, burning homesteads and terrorizing anyone who might have helped Anna. Clayton had received word from a sheriff 2 counties over about what Thorne's men had done to a family who'd given Anna shelter for 1 night. The details made even a hardened lawman like Clayton feel sick. These weren't just bandits looking for easy money. They were killers who enjoyed their work. The marshal walked to Anna's cell and handed her a cup of water through the bars. She took it gratefully, her fingers briefly touching his. Neither of them pulled away immediately. Over the past 3 days, they'd talked more than Clayton usually talked to anyone. Anna had told him about her father, about the happy years before all this started. Clayton found himself sharing things too, stories about his younger days as a deputy in Kansas. He told her about the gang he'd failed to stop, the people who died because he'd been too slow, too trusting. That failure had driven him west, searching for redemption in a town that bore the name. Anna wasn't what Clayton had expected. When he'd first heard about a woman carrying valuable information, he'd imagined someone weak and helpless. But Anna had steel in her spine. She'd survived 6 months on the run, using her wits and determination to stay ahead of Thorne. She could ride a horse as well as any man, knew how to use a rifle, and had once escaped from Thorne's men by setting their own camp on fire as a distraction. The more Clayton learned about her, the more his determination to protect her grew. This wasn't just about doing his duty anymore. It had become personal. The afternoon sun was starting to sink lower when Danny Rodriguez, one of Clayton's deputies, burst through the office door. His face was pale, and sweat dripped from his forehead despite the cool breeze outside. He'd been watching the North Road all day from the bell tower of the abandoned church. Clayton knew what the young man was going to say before he opened his mouth. They were coming. Danny had counted 12 riders, moving slowly but steadily toward town. They'd be here by sunset. Clayton sent Danny to warn the townspeople, though he knew most would simply lock their doors and pray the trouble passed them by. As word spread through Redemption Gulch, fear took hold. The baker closed his shop early, boarding up the windows. The saloon keeper sent his girls to hide in the cellar. Even the town drunk sobered up enough to find a hiding spot. Only a handful of men were willing to stand with Clayton. There was Bill Morrison, the blacksmith, whose massive arms could swing a hammer like a weapon. There was also Pedro Vasquez, who ran the stable and had fought in the war between the states. A few others promised to help if needed, but Clayton knew promises meant little when bullets started flying. Thorne rode into town just as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky orange and red. He didn't come charging in with guns blazing. That wasn't his style. Instead, he rode slowly down Main Street, his men spread out behind him in a show of force. Bartholomew Thorne was not what most people expected in an outlaw leader. He dressed like a gentleman, with a black coat and string tie. His boots were polished, and his hat was free of dust. But his eyes gave him away. They were cold and grey, like chips of winter ice. Those eyes had watched Thomas Whitfield die without showing a hint of emotion. Thorne stopped his horse in front of the marshal's office. Clayton stood on the wooden walkway, his hand resting on the handle of his pistol. The two men stared at each other while the town held its breath. Then Thorne smiled, expression that never reached those cold eyes, and spoke in a voice smooth as oil. He said he was a reasonable man who didn't want trouble. All he wanted was to speak with Anna Whitfield about some business concerning her late father. If Clayton would just release her, they could conclude their transaction peacefully. No one had to get hurt. Clayton's answer was short and clear. Anna was under his protection, and she'd stay that way. If Thorne wanted her, he'd have to go through the marshal first. The smile disappeared from Thorne's face, replaced by something darker. He gave Clayton 1 hour to reconsider. Then he and his men rode to the saloon, taking it over like they owned the place. The terrified owner served them whiskey while they waited, their weapons prominently displayed on every table. Back in the jail, Anna pressed against the bars of her cell. She begged Clayton to let her go, not to save herself but to protect the town. She knew what Thorne was capable of, had seen the burned buildings and fresh graves he left behind. But Clayton wouldn't bend. He'd made a promise to protect her, and he meant to keep it. Besides, he knew Thorne would never let Anna live once he had what he wanted. The only way this ended was with either Thorne or them dead. As the hour passed, Clayton prepared for battle. He positioned Bill Morrison at the window with a shotgun, while Pedro Vasquez took cover behind an overturned desk. Danny Rodriguez climbed back to his position in the bell tower with a rifle, ready to provide cover fire. Clayton himself loaded every weapon in the office, lining them up within easy reach. Anna wanted to help, but Clayton refused to unlock her cell. If things went badly, the iron bars might be her last defense. The attack came at dawn, not at the end of the hour. Thorne had given. The outlaw was smart enough to know Clayton would be expecting something when the deadline passed. Instead, he waited through the night, letting exhaustion wear down the defenders. Then, just as the first light appeared in the east, Thorne's men struck from 3 directions at once. Windows shattered as bullets flew through the air. The morning calm erupted into chaos and violence. Bill Morrison's shotgun roared, driving back the first wave of attackers. Pedro Vasquez proved his military experience, picking off targets with deadly accuracy. From the bell tower, Danny kept Thorne's men from surrounding the building completely. But there were too many outlaws and too few defenders. Slowly, inevitably, Thorne's gang pressed closer to the marshal's office. 2 of them reached the back door and started breaking it down with axes they'd taken from the general store. Clayton fell back to the cell area, positioning himself between Anna and danger. The back door splintered and crashed open. 3 outlaws rushed in, guns blazing. Clayton dropped 2 of them before a bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him around. The 3rd outlaw advanced, thinking the marshal was finished, but Anna had grabbed a rifle Clayton had left near her cell. Then Thorne himself appeared in the doorway, stepping over his fallen men with casual indifference. He looked at Anna with those cold eyes and asked if she was ready to be reasonable. Before she could answer, Clayton rose from where he'd fallen, blood seeping through his shirt. The 2 men faced each other in the narrow space between the cells. Thorne drew his pistol, but Clayton was faster. Even wounded, his shot struck Thorne in the chest, sending the outlaw leader staggering backward. As Thorne fell, his remaining men lost their nerve. Without their leader's cold intelligence guiding them, they were just common criminals facing determined resistance. Some fled immediately, riding hard for the horizon. Others surrendered when the townspeople, emboldened by Thorne's defeat, emerged from hiding with their own weapons. By the time the sun fully rose over Redemption Gulch, the battle was over. The street was littered with broken glass and spent shells, but the town had survived. Clayton unlocked Anna's cell with shaking hands. His shoulder wound wasn't serious, but the loss of blood had left him weak. Anna helped him to a chair, then tended his injury with gentle efficiency. As she worked, the townspeople gathered outside, no longer seeing her as a curse, but as one of their own. She'd fought for their town just as they had. The secret of the gold remained hers, but it no longer seemed as important as what she'd found in Redemption Gulch. In the days that followed, Anna made a decision. She could have left, taken her father's secret to San Francisco or Denver, where she might have sold it for enough money to live comfortably. But something kept her in Redemption Gulch. Maybe it was the way the townspeople now smiled when they saw her on the street. Maybe it was the peace she felt for the first time since her father's death. Or maybe it was the way Marshal Clayton looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, with a mixture of admiration and something deeper. Anna used part of her father's map to file a proper claim, bringing prosperity to Redemption Gulch through legal means. The town grew and thrived, adding new businesses and attracting honest families looking for opportunity. She opened a school, teaching children to read and write, passing on the education her father had given her. Clayton continued as marshal, but now he had something more to protect than just the law. He had a home, a community, and a future he hadn't dared imagine before Anna arrived. The jail cell where Anna had stayed was converted into a storage room. Sometimes, when Clayton worked late, he'd look at that empty cell and remember those 3 days when everything changed. He'd locked Anna away to keep her safe, thinking iron bars were the strongest protection he could offer. But in the end, it wasn't the jail that saved her. It was courage, trust, and the willingness of good people to stand against evil. Anna had taught him that true safety doesn't come from locks and bars, but from the bonds we forge with others and the strength we find in ourselves when faced with darkness. The story of the marshal who locked up an innocent woman became legend in Redemption Gulch, told differently each time but always ending the same way. Love and courage had defeated greed and violence. A town had found its soul, and 2 people had found each other. Some nights, when the desert wind blew through the streets, old-timers would gather in the saloon and retell the tale, each adding their own details about the battle. But Anna and Clayton never corrected them. They knew the truth of what had happened, and that was enough. Their life together was the real treasure, worth more than all the gold hidden in those distant mountains.